All right, good evening. It's about time for us to get started. We're going to be in 2 Samuel 15, 1 through 14 is what we're looking at. And I said Sunday morning that this lesson would be one that I would guarantee you've never really had a discussion of or Bible class about in church. So if you have, tell me, because I owe you a shake, and we'll go get one. This is going to be looking at the ideas of manipulation for reasons we'll get into in just a minute. But I want to just read it real quickly, make sure we're all familiar with it, 1 through 14. But before we do that, let's go ahead and have a prayer. Father, thank you for all that you've done for us, for the love that you've shown to us, the good rain that we've had today. We pray, Lord, that with the storms coming, that we'll be safe in here and that you'll protect this town and let not anything bad happen as far as the weather goes. Please help us to glorify you in the time that we have together, that we can grow closer to you, closer to each other, and see how we can live our lives in the best ways possible, and that we can be lights to other people in the world around us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Okay, so this is Absalom's coup, or his treason. It says, after this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice." And so it was, whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. It came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt in Geshur in Assyria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord." And the king said to him, "Go in peace." So he rose and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron." And with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city, from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy grew stronger, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. And a messenger came to David, saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." So David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise and let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword." So at least David was smart enough to realize what was happening and the implications of what was going on, and acted accordingly. So we're going to talk about this in the sense of what manipulation is, what we can see. Actually, we're going to go into that, but I wanted to start, first of all, talking about the dangers of this. It's not my intention to go through this with a critical eye as far as what we do in this congregation, right? This is not directed at anyone or anything, but it is something, I have to say that because in any group of situations when things that are this personal can come up, it can be volatile. So we need to remember that we're all on the same team here, right? So when we're talking about the scriptures, we need to keep that in mind. And one of the dangers is that identifying motives is difficult, but sometimes it's necessary. And we say all the time we don't want to judge people's hearts, but in some instances we have to make judgments. And judging their hearts is part of the process. That's one of the most difficult things to do. It also means that we need to take our time and do it slowly and not jump to conclusions, that kind of thing. But sooner or later, we're going to have to make those kind of judgments, especially our elders. They're going to do it all the time. And there are many, many reasons for that. We have newcomers coming in. They need to know why they're here, what they're up to. They need to make assessments of these people and to determine whether or not they should be here. And most of the time, people are not nefarious. Most people come in, they don't want any problems. They just want to come in and worship God. But there are a few. I've seen it in the mission field many times where people will come in and they'll destroy the whole congregation because they wanted to take some and start their own church so that they could tell everybody how many people they baptized when they went home. They didn't baptize them. They just took 50 from one church and started another. And then they give a good report at home saying, we got 50 members. All of a sudden, we converted a whole church. I mean, that thing happens a lot. So there's a discernment that has to come. That's one of the dangers, one of the reasons we're talking about this. Also, when we're talking about manipulation, some things may seem manipulative, but are not. I am not an expert. I'm not a psychologist, but just like you, we've all seen it happen. We've all experienced it. I've experienced it a lot. I've seen a lot of it in the church. Over my 25 years, I've seen a lot. I've been manipulated many times by people and did not appreciate it, but didn't understand what I was looking at. And so it's easy to get caught up in things. Also, manipulation relates to matters of integrity and trust. What I mean by that is that when we're looking at the idea of manipulation, if we have integrity, then we won't be manipulating people. But although sometimes we may do it unintentionally, may not realize that this is manipulation. So I'm not saying that if we ever do any of these things that we're ungodly and we have no hope. May have the best of intentions, but all of us can learn habits or things that might not be as good for us as we think they are. And also, if we are seeking to have integrity, we're trying to build trust with other people, and if we're manipulating other people, or if it looks like we're manipulating other people, then the trust will be destroyed. If they see it and they think it, they will not trust you, probably never again, because it's one of those things, you fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, right? So this is one of the reasons I think we have to talk about it. All right. Also, we can learn, as I said, we can learn bad traits just as easily as we can learn good ones. So the good news is when we identify them, we can move away from them. I've seen things, last, 20 years of myself, my own habits that I'd picked up from here and there, and sometimes I invented, I thought, and realized later on, that's really not such a cool way to do this. I've been guilty of several of these things that we're going to talk about. So this is something that we all hopefully can benefit from. The goals of the class is to define what manipulation is, which is not easy to do. We're also going to discuss why it happens and what this implies about the manipulator, and then look at some warning signs. So this is not going to be a whole lot of discussion. The reason for the not having discussion is because we're covering so much material. I didn't want to take 2 or 3 weeks to go through this, but I also didn't want to get halfway through and find out we didn't make it. I think it's going to be important for us. But it is based, at least in principle, on what we see in 2 Samuel 15 as we go through it. All right, let's look at the need. Let's look at a few passages together. Acts chapter 20. This is Paul speaking to the Ephesian elders in verse 29. It says, after this I know this, that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. Okay, so he says, even from among yourselves, speaking to the elders there, men will rise up, speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after themselves. Incidentally, it's Ephesus where the first recorded event that we have in history of the first eldership who appointed a head elder was in Ephesus. And that happened just after Paul's death. And from there, the synods began, and they encouraged other churches to do the same thing. So every church had one pastor or one bishop over the eldership. That's where it began, and that's what he said was going to happen. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 1. Says, but there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who brought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. And it's obvious that this could relate to preachers, Cannot deny that, but it also can't be denied that it can relate to any person in the church who brings in destructive heresies. One of the biggest, like I said, in the mission field, one of the biggest divisions comes in the mission field in many places from what we used to call the anti-movement. It's alive and well and strong, and they're really wreaking havoc on a lot of places, and because they're coming in secretly and bringing in destructive heresies. All right, 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 6. This gets into more about the manipulative tactics. It says that for of this sort are those who creep into households and make captives of gullible women loaded down with sins, led by various lusts, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. So one of the tactics is when you're talking about going into households and working with or making captives of women, this is automatically suspicious because it's automatically undermining authority. The women in the congregation don't have authority. But if they're going to the women, why don't they start with the people who are in authority if there's something that needs to change, instead of trying to create a movement among the women who really can't do much, but they can certainly rally around and create a lot of havoc that could cause problems. So that gets into some tactics that they might see. The next one was Jude 4, which is, of course, right before Revelation. Jude 4, this was a book warning people of plots and schemes that were going on in the church during that time. It says, certain men have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were marked out for this condemnation. Ungodly men who turn the grace of our God into lewdness and deny the only Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ. And the implications here in that verse, and really in the rest of the book, the descriptions that he gives, are people who are going in undermining, instead of boldly confronting changes, ideas that need to be changed, they're undermining ideas that are being taught, and in a sense, in a word, seducing people to follow their ideas. And this relates also to Galatians chapter 4 and verse 17. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that this is going on in this congregation. I'm saying that this has happened in history, that the church was warned about this, and we need to be aware of it and ready. I'm going to talk about that in just a second here. It says, they zealously court you, but for no good. Yes, they want to exclude you, that you may be zealous for them. And the idea there is they're gaining followers. Well, who's he talking about? He's talking about these false teachers that went from place to place, evidently right behind Paul. When Paul would leave, these people would come in and say, oh, yeah, you need to be a Christian to go to heaven, but you got to be a Jew first. And so they would convince everyone they had to be circumcised, and then they could become Christians. And they were just making a mess of the gospel. And so that's what they were doing, but they were doing it secretly, underhandedly. This kind of thing was going on. And they were also, notice it says they zealously court you. Well, the idea there behind it is they're trying to, in various ways and means, they're trying to manipulate you into being a follower. And that's a very dangerous thing. And again, when I say manipulation, I said it's difficult to define, and it is. It comes back down to intention. That's why we have to judge hearts. But because the difference between, as I see it, between manipulation and persuasion is very fine line, and it all comes down to, why are you trying to persuade them? What are you trying to persuade them to do? Whose benefit is it that you're trying to persuade them into this way? We're not going to look at it from those two perspectives, but those two things in comparison give you a lot of information. And so actually, we're going to say the idea of persuasion and the idea of leadership, which is what we're going to be talking about. That's the need. As far as why it happens, it's almost always about control. And it's about people trying to either control their own surroundings or control other people for their own benefits. But there is control involved, and there also, in that control, we're talking about the use of power, and the accumulation of power, right? And so if people, there are many reasons that people want power. Sometimes it's from insecurities. They just want to be able to control their own lives and their circumstances, and so they manipulate people around them to do that. For example, some people might have the inclination to think that their happiness depends on everyone else around them doing what is expected. And if they don't do what is expected, I can't be happy, so therefore I must manipulate you to do what I need you to do so that I can be happy. That's a controlling mechanism. And we all do it to a certain extent, and again, we should do it to a certain extent, because if you're not living in accordance with the faith, I should be talking to you and trying to persuade you, right? But the difference between persuasion and manipulation, again, is intent. Does it have to do with their best interest in a relationship with God, or does it have to do with my comfort? Those are two different things, right? So what happens is control, and the implication of this is that deep down, the manipulator, whether addressing this in their mind or not, they believe that people around them are inferior to them. And so what they're going to do, instead of having an open conversation or open dialogue and saying these things need to happen, they try to assert ways to have people change without them realizing they need to change, or that without having to have the discussions. And there may be many reasons for that too. One of them, in doing my research, I ran across a really good point to this in a debate about this. If you run into someone who is mentally handicapped, and it would be, let's just say they have severe dementia, you're not going to be able to sit down and reason with them and convince them to do the things that they need to do. So you manipulate them, because you have no other way of communicating. I don't know if there's anything wrong with that kind of manipulation. You're trying to do it to help them. But when they can communicate and we still do it anyway, we're avoiding the communication, that's when it becomes, I think, a problem. And it can undermine trust, all kinds of things like that. All right, so that's something to think about. Interestingly enough, almost every division on record in the church, going all the way back to the beginning of the church, has to do with power and control and the abuse of it. It has to do with the abuse of authority, which we've seen a lot of that kind of stuff coming up. The abuse of authority, not understanding what authority means, not understanding what leadership means. And actually, we've had some movements in the church. For example, in the 70s, I remember hearing all kinds of things about the Crossroads movement. Y'all remember hearing about that? What was it about? Power. They were centralizing power into one congregation that controlled the entire world. That's what they wanted. They're still working at. They're still doing it. Thankfully, they don't call themselves Churches of Christ anymore. But they had a misunderstanding of what power and authority actually were. And because of their misunderstanding of it, they manipulated and abused lots and lots of people in the way they did things and the tactics. So that's why it's a dangerous idea. One of the best ways that I know to discuss the difference, what manipulation is to compare it with leadership. Because ultimately, leadership is influencing people to a certain behavior, and manipulation is also influencing people to a certain behavior. And so this will help us see, hopefully, the differences, and then we can see a little bit more clearly what we're talking about, and we can see it in ourselves perhaps. Like I said, I was going through this, and I'm going, oh, wow, and memories started flooding my mind of, oh, man, I didn't do that very well. We all have difficulties, things like this. So the intention is not, like I said, browbeating, but awareness. All right, so the difference between manipulation and leadership. With manipulation, the aim is control. That's it. With leadership, the aim is to inspire, to guide, and to empower. All right. So what does it mean to empower someone? What does it mean to empower someone?
Well, literally giving them the power to do something.
Yes, you're giving them the techniques, you're giving them skills, you're giving them opportunity, you're giving them the encouragement to do something that they have the ability to do. They may not see that they have the ability, but a leader will help them see, oh, here, I can do this. And so what do? You talk about things that they can do, right? Enable them, yeah. In a good way, yeah.
An empowered person has the freedom to use their power.
That's right. You allow freedom to do what they think is going to be best, right? So that it's going to use their power in the best way that they can. That doesn't mean you don't have guidelines for them. It just means you have guidelines so that it's kind of like a barrel of a gun. You put the guidelines there so that this bullet can shoot straighter, right? You just give them more ability to do more. Yeah.
Yeah, Jason, you probably heard me make this comment before. To me, one of the best illustrations of what we're talking about here was Dwight Eisenhower during World War II when he was Supreme Allied Commander
Mm-hmm.
in Europe. And I think he made this comment to his Chief of Staff, James Smith, just a couple months before the Normandy invasion. But he said, you know, he said, in my 25 years in the Army, he said, if I haven't learned with this whole thing, he said, I've learned this. He says, I can accomplish pretty much whatever I want to accomplish as long as I don't care if it takes credit for doing it.
That's true. That's a good point.
That's where most of us fall way short.
That's right. We all kind of want that pat on the back.
Something getting done, we want people to know that hey, we did this.
Oh yeah, if I do something, everybody's going to know about it, right? Yeah. I'm gonna find a way to say that. I try not to do that, but so I was saying me, but facetiously, I don't think I do that, but I have. And I'm like, yeah, nobody knows about this. I just kind of let it slip in conversation. Yeah, I did this. You know, we all do that kind of thing. Manipulation relies on deception, coercion, and exploitation. Exploitation means that you're taking advantage of someone who in a weakness. You're promising something to a weaker person to manipulate them to do something you want in exchange for helping them meet some kind of need that they might have, a weakness, or you're using it just because they're weak. You're tricking them into doing something. Weak-minded would fit into this as well. We all have, I don't mean weak-minded as in stupid. I mean weak-minded as in, I had in my past a tendency when people were very strong-willed, and I still have to watch it. People are very strong-willed, come at me, and they make demands of me. I snap too. I follow. And it comes very easily. And I have been manipulated and abused in many different ways because of that characteristic. So I've had to learn to stand up and say, you're not going to... I'm very, very sensitive to people who are very much trying to control because I've been manipulated so much. They may have good intentions, but I don't know if I can see if they have good intentions or not. I don't trust myself because I've been duped so many times, and it happens. So that's what I'm talking about. Sometimes people can just be forced into something, pressured into something they don't want to do or don't think is right. But a leader relies on open communication and trust. It doesn't mean that we're always going to do it well, but it is, we're wanting to talk about it, and we're openly talking about however we want to go with it. Whatever you want to bring up, let's talk about it. And also trust. I'm going to trust you to do what you say you're going to do. And that's one of those things that with leadership, you can't just do that from the very beginning. You have to actually help people learn to do the things that they need to do, and because they may not be doing it correctly. So there's training that's involved, but sooner or later you got to say, okay, I've taught you everything I can. I'm going to step back and see what you do. And if a leader doesn't ever do that, he's not a leader. That's just the way it works. All right. The other one, manipulator seeks his own interests, whereas a leader seeks to align interests of team leaders and members. So they're trying to align everyone together on the same page instead of doing what I want to do, right? Those are big differences. And leaders obviously have to talk about things that they want to do, but the approach in how to get everyone to doing it is very different. So there's some people who try to say, I want to do this, and so I'm going to convince everyone through talking about it and openly discussing it that this is the best way to go, or I can just make a command and command everyone around me to follow the command, and that's not leadership. So that's part of this. Also, manipulation undermines autonomy. Autonomy is your ability to do things on your own, right? That doesn't mean that leaders, like our elders, it doesn't mean that they can't impose on us ideas and restrictions and regulations. That's not the point at all. But in doing that, you have to, a leader will support and respect autonomy and work with them based on their abilities and skills. It doesn't make sense to try to put a square peg in a round hole or a round peg. You know what I'm saying? We want to make things fit. So we don't want to be the kind of people who will say, I don't care what your skills or talents are, you're doing this. That doesn't make sense. What we do is we say, well, we need this done. Is there a way that you can do something similar, at least in the ballpark, based on what your skills and abilities are, right? So this is what we do. We support autonomy instead of undermining it. Yes?
Sounds just like delegating to me.
Sounds like delegating, yeah. Manipulation undermines authority.
No, I don't mean the bad.
Oh, I know what you mean. Undermining authority is done by speaking bad of the leaders or leadership, speaking bad of the programs or ideas, speaking bad. Now, again, that does not mean that we have no ability or no right to say, I don't like what's going on. That's not what we're talking about. I'm not talking about that at all. But when we do that to other people who have no control over what's happening, then all we're doing is undermining what's happening. We're causing people to be disinterested, or we're causing people to, what's the word I'm looking for? Find reasons to dislike a particular thing or person, right? I was in one place where the elders absolutely loved me. I mean, they did, and I loved them. Oh man, it was such a great place. But the deacons, no, I'm not saying our deacons this way now, but the deacons, three of them, I think there were 9 deacons. 3 of them decided I was moving before we unloaded our U-Haul, and they told me that. And they had never met me. It wasn't me. They just didn't like the fact that the elders hired me. They wanted the old preacher, and they were mad, and they decided I was moving. And they made a huge concentrated effort to get me out of there, and I'm so stubborn. I stayed there longer than I'd ever stayed anywhere, just to say you're not going to control me, right? But I wish I wouldn't have, honestly. Anyway, they did that by undermining everything that we did, and they just went around telling everybody, don't you hate this? Don't you look at that? Just gripe and complain. The elders would come to me every month or two with a list of things that they didn't like about me. And I'd say, can you please I knew who it was, but I didn't officially know. Can you please tell me who said this so I can go talk to them? No, sorry, they asked me not to say anything. So I'm like, what do you want me to do with it then? I can't ask them what they mean by any of this. Will you ask them? Well, they told me what it meant, so you just have to just deal with it the best you can. So I would take it and rot it up and throw it in the trash. Well, what else am I going to do, right? All right, so they're undermining authority. Leadership leads by authority. They're not undermining the authority and the regulations. They're trying to support it by doing what they were told to do, and that means that they're going to be maybe doing it in many ways, and maybe doing it in ways that we may not appreciate or like. But if they're still doing it in accordance with the authority that they have, then or have been given, then they're not undermining anything. They're actually supporting what they were told. Manipulation leads by command. It's do as I say, not as I do. Man, that's a big one, right? You need to do this, this, and this. I never do it. I'm not going to do it, but you need to. That's a biggie. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to do everything everyone else does, right? We understand that. But if it's never, I'm doing something, here's some things for you to do, it's always, I'm sitting down watching you do it, that's manipulation. Try to get people to do things that we want them to do, and we don't have to do it that way. So we make it do all kinds of ways for that. But a leader leads by example and persuasion, right? So we're trying to persuade people. One of the verses in Hebrews that talks about obeying your leaders, obey those who rule over you, is a word that is literally talking about that they persuade you to follow them. And it's about the idea that leadership is a persuasive event. It's activity, but it's persuasion to follow along and do the same things, or do stuff to help with the same things. Manipulation, yeah.
Well, in any organization, and I've seen it in worship, and I've seen it in aircraft squadron. When you have leadership that says, do as I say, and not as I do, automatically, morale just...
Yeah, morale just tanks, doesn't it? Yeah. It always does.
I've worked for that Caddo before.
Yeah. I have too. So manipulation prioritizes the manipulator's goals over the team well-being, right? And well-being means mental health, physical health, or pushing too hard, or all kinds of things. It doesn't really matter. If you're being manipulated, you don't really matter. What matters is what you're going to accomplish for the manipulator. That's all that matters. Under leadership, though, you prioritize the well-being and success of the team, right? And that includes the individual has to be prioritized, and they have to have success. So a team leader will help the individual members of the team succeed in what they're doing so that the whole team will succeed. And that looks very different depending on the team, right? A few more here. Oh, no, that's it. So those are just some I've seen through videos and research. Some of those were from personal experience, but this is also from seeing a lot of different things. Incidentally, these primarily came. I went to artificial intelligence, and it said, "What's the difference between manipulation and leadership?" And it came up with this list. And it was the best explanation I've ever seen. It was really good. That's why I included it here. So I don't want to pretend like I'm the one that came up with all this stuff. I did come up with a few, but it was good stuff. Anyway, Absalom's manipulations. Let's look at that. That's back here in 2 Samuel 15. And first of all, he created a false image. Look in verse 1. It happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. What is the image he's trying to convey? Strength. Importance. Yes. Strength and importance. Who is the one who provided these 50 men and the horses and the chariots? He did, right. So it wasn't like King David said, "Let me honor you by bestowing upon you honor," and no, he was presenting himself as if he had it. He was assuming it. And in doing that, what happens? Well, people start following. People are influenced by impressions, right? That's why we say all the time, you only get one chance to make a first impression. It's important how people see us. So that's one of the things. They create a false impression. He created a false impression. Yeah.
The men and the horses, they were King David's.
That's true. They were David's. So Absalom absconded them, if that's the right word. We also have false promises and flattery. He would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, Absalom would call him and say, "What city are you from?" He would say, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe." Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there's no deputy of the king to hear you." Now, I don't know if that was a false statement or if he's just lying to them. But the implication is, if only I were in charge, you would be cared for. You'd be taken care of. I would make sure. And look, I've got all these men and chariots in front of me. You know how important I am. I can get this done, right? So what is he doing by making false promises and flatteries? He's undermining authority, undermining David. Right out in front of David's nose, and David didn't notice. Or if he did, maybe didn't know what to do about it. He undermined David's leadership, 3-5. He says in verse 4, "Moreover, Absalom would say, 'Oh, that I were made judge in the land. Everyone has a suit or cause would come to me. I would give him justice.' So it was whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him." What is he doing there? I love you. I care about you. David doesn't. It's obvious. But if I were king, oh man, things would be so much better. Right? He also exploited complaints. Verse 4. Anyone who had a suit or a cause would come. And this is I say it's gold on the slide. I've said this before in evangelism. When you find something that people complain about, that is gold. You can use it either to help that person or to manipulate that person. Either way, it's gold. It's powerful. Because when you find out what people are complaining about, if you're a Christian, your first job, especially if they're not Christians, is to say, "Do you want to fix that? You know that there's ways that you can get around that, right? You may not say it exactly like that. But if you're a manipulative person, you may just simply decide, I'm going to go, I've been this way, and I've seen other people do it. We get around other people, and what do? We like to try to draw out complaints. What are we doing that for? I don't know. It could be that we're trying to manipulate them. We find their complaints, and we promise to help fix their complaints. They will follow you to the ends of the earth. So they exploited complaints. We also have conspiracy and secrecy in verses 10 through 12. As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, say Absalom reigns in Hebron. Did you notice that in, let's see here, where did it go? All the people that went down, 11. With Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and didn't know anything. Now they're included in this coup and had no idea. How did they get to that point of being involved in a coup without even knowing it? Because Absalom manipulated them to be in the position where he had them. That's the only way to explain it. And it can happen. People get caught up in things, and they don't even realize what's going on. So conspiracy and secrecy, these are things that will destroy any kind of group. All right, so let's look in Matthew chapter 10. There may be some more to say about that, but it just enough to show you, hey, this is based on that passage. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 16 says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues." Okay, so he's giving them warning, and the warning should be applied to all of us. We know that people are not always out for our best interests. And so there's some things that we need to watch for. I was just dealing with a woman today who she was talking about problems she was having, and I was trying to help her, and she had red flag after red flag after red flag about her husband. And I said, you need to go to a counselor. You need to find someone to help intervene here, because you're not telling me things that are good. And she decided to go get some help, but she doesn't know how she's going to do it. Anyways, a big uproar, but a lot of times people don't see the red flags. They don't recognize them. Or if they do, they doubt themselves and they think, I don't want to admit this. So when they bring them out to other people, they're actually looking for validation. Are these things that I'm really should be concerned about? And with that woman, I said, absolutely you should be concerned about it. She never asked, but I said, you should be concerned about these things. Here are some things that we can look at. First of all, falsehoods. There are a lot of different ways this comes out, right? Some people just lie because it's easier than telling the truth. When the truth would do them better, they still tell lies. Just some people that way. But it also could just be falsehoods like exaggerations. I mean, who in here does not make an exaggeration every now and then, right? We all have done that at least once in our lives. So we all do some of these things, and it doesn't mean that you're a manipulative person just because you make an exaggeration. Spam risk, quit. But it is something that we ought to watch for. If this is a habit of ours, we ought to ask some questions. Hey, does this apply to me? Am I doing this kind of stuff? Also, inconsistencies. I say one thing, but I don't do it. This is a big one because I know all of us fall into this category, right? We all say some things we're going to do, and then we don't do them. Again, this doesn't mean that you're a manipulative person, but a manipulative person will do that kind of thing. They'll say all kinds of things, but they're inconsistent in the way they behave, and it doesn't seem to bother them. Also, tearing down other people. There we go. This is a habit that's done. There's lots and lots of ways. Usually it relates to making them think that they're stupid, or making them think they can't do anything right, or telling them how stupid or how worthless they are. They can't do anything with their life, and blah, blah, blah. So there's a long litany of things that people can use to tear you down. And, as Christians, sometimes we have to tear down behaviors, but we don't tear down people. And some people, manipulators, tear down the person trying to change the behavior. And that's not the same thing. So we have to be sensitive to that. Also, there's lots of ways that people put pressure on you to control you. If you feel like people are pressuring you to do something, that's when you need to take a step back. Say, wait a minute, what's the motive here? Are you pressuring me to do something because it's in my best interest or because it's in your best interest? A great example would be if you're on the phone with someone and they're trying to sell you something, right? Whose interest is it usually that they're looking for? They'll tell you it's in your interest, but you know it's their interest that they're concerned about. That's why they're pushing so hard. So after a while, if you are resistive, you're resisting and they still push and push and push, you got to ask, are you really doing this for my benefit? Because most people are not going to push very hard for your benefit, but they will push very hard for theirs, right? Now, some people will push really hard for your benefit. I've had people in my life that way, and I love them, but most people won't. All right, flattery and charm. Flattery is excessively telling good things about someone. Flattery is one of those things that's really hard to discern between flattery and encouraging, right? We have to encourage people, but flattery is different than encouragement. One way of looking at that is a flatterer will usually talk about things that you can't control, where an encourager will focus on things you can control. For example, they might say, I love the way you did your hair. Well, do they have any control over that? Yes. But a flatterer might say that too, but they also might say, oh, I love your hair, the color of it. Well, if they didn't dye their hair, do they really have any control over? No, it's flattery. It's really kind of pointless. And that's maybe a whole nother class, but gaslighting is another one. That's a big term nowadays. But gaslighting it's based on a movie that was put out. I don't have time to explain it, but it's basically making someone believe that they're crazy. That's basically what it is. Someone will, for example, I knew of a man who would, when his wife turned around, he would put things in her drink. Just a marble or medicines sometimes, all kinds of things. Whatever he had, he just put it in her drink. And she'd turn around and drink it, and she's like, this tastes funny. It's like, there's nothing wrong with your drink. I didn't do anything to you. And she would accuse him, and she'd find the marble in there. I didn't put that marble in. You must have put that marble in there and forgot. He'd do things like that all the time. So he's putting it on them and blaming them for it, and it's a psychological thing to do to try to make people feel like they question themselves on everything. And if you're always constantly questioning yourself about everything, it's possible that you're being gaslit, though not always. Sometimes we're just insecure. Also, isolation tactics. People will try to isolate you from other people around you. So especially a husband-wife relationship, all the friends, all you hear about is how terrible those friends are. And the attempt is to isolate you from those people so you won't have the ability to run if you ever need to run. That's part of the reason. It's controlling. Isolation also comes in, usually it comes in by the way of talking about other people negatively so that the person around them feels like they're only safe around you. They're only healthy around you. Everyone else is out to hurt them and out to get them. There are dangers in the world, but we have to have balance, right? Also, disrespect of common boundaries. Some people just disrespect boundaries. I had a elder friend where every time I talked to him after church, I had to put a pew between us because he was one of these guys. He'd get right here, and he would talk to me, and he usually had bad breath. And I don't mean to be mean, but that's where he was, and he wasn't trying to manipulate. But other people do that. They want to make you uncomfortable. It's a control tactic. They're getting into your boundaries, and that's a physical boundary. There's a lot of other boundaries. They have no regard. They don't even recognize that boundaries exist. That's a red flag because they are not aware. That's the problem. Also, emotional outbursts. This can be anger or crying, whatever it is. That doesn't mean that if you are angry now and then, or if you cry, that I'm saying you're manipulative. No, but these are tactics that people will use to cause all kinds of things. Also, no empathy. The only reason someone who's manipulating you has empathy for you is because they feel like they can get something from you by being empathetic. That's the way it works. So if you have friends that never empathize with you, you probably don't have friends. They're probably not your friend. But some people just can't do it. They don't have it within them. That's a red flag. Withholding necessary information. This is one of those tactics that people will use. They intentionally withhold things that you need to know in order to do what you're supposed to do, so that they can come back later and gripe at you about not having it done, and they didn't tell you what needed to be done. We had this. I'm not going to say it. I just recently saw this whole situation about people wanting to meet at a certain place at a certain time, and they never told the other people that they were supposed to meet there. Well, that's withholding necessary information. Just a few more things. Unusual, excessive showing of love, especially impersonal showing of love. Unusual is whatever is unusual, right? It varies. Excessive, you got to ask questions. Why? Why would somebody excessively show love? Especially if it's not personal, if it's impersonal and cold. That's usually a sign of flattery. Your instincts tell you something is off. And they say this to women all the time. I think all of us should think about this. If you feel like your instincts say something's off about this, you just back off. It's not gonna hurt anyone to back away and to reassess and think through what's happening. If people can't understand that, it's probably because they don't have your best interest in mind to begin with. But every one of us can understand, hey, if we feel like things aren't quite right, I want to take a step back. You should be able to do that, all right? And again, none of these by themselves mean that you're a manipulator. Even several of these together may not mean that, but it ought to make us ask questions, right? We're looking for patterns of behavior. And this is what we could have seen. David easily could have seen this if he would have looked at it and recognized it. Anyway, thank you for letting me regurgitate all this information to you.